Thank you, Craig. So welcome to this second session of the Buber book that we're working on for the pre-High Holiday Elul teaching. Last week, Rabbi Loiben taught, and I'm teaching this week. I believe Rabbi Davis is next week, and then Rabbi Pomerantz. All of this leading into Rosh Hashanah 5783. So I do want to say in advance that Rabbi Loiben was a little frustrated that the online people didn't participate so much last time. I'm not letting you get away with it this time. I'm just telling you in advance. I expect you to participate. That means you got to either comment or ask questions or something. All right. I think she said Michael Berman was the only one who spoke online last time. So it's not enough. Michael Berman alone, not enough. Okay. So we're going to chapter 2, and I do want to begin just to make sure, because I don't know if Rabbi Loiben did this with you. If you have a sense of what Hasidism is, so I just want to take a few minutes to kind of do that with you. So what do you know about the whole idea of Hasidism? When did it begin? Who began it? What kind of a movement is it? Anybody have any recollection that, Amy?
Well, I'm here in person. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. It began, I believe, in the 18th century, and it was started by, I guess they were rabbis, they were thinkers who were frustrated with the emphasis on learning as the goal of Judaism, and they believed that that the real way to connect with God was through emotions, and so they put forth this way of being, this way of observing, where the emphasis was on singing and dancing and I guess finding joy in Judaism.
Good, very good. I don't know I hope you heard all of that, but we're talking about 1750 or so, 18th century. The person that we ascribe the beginning to was Baal Shem Tov, Israel Baal Shem Tov, who was a rabbi, a teacher, and as Amy said, he was reacting. It wasn't just him, there was a movement, but he was the key figure. And he was reacting to what we think of as pilpul. It's a word that some of you may have heard, which is kind of the intricate argumentation that the rabbis were involved in their learning process. And it didn't speak to the average Jew. If you think of Tevye, right, think of the character of Tevye, he kind of had a vague idea of the stories of the Bible, and he misquoted them. But he knew the words and he knew the stories more or less. And that was the average Jew. The average Jew was that kind of person. And they didn't relate to this kind of pilpul, this legalism. And so Baal Shem Tov and his followers and others said, let's go out to the woods and sing and dance. Let's celebrate to God. Let's commune with nature. Let's be a part of the world God has given us. And part of Hasidism is telling stories, often about the rabbis, not exclusively, but they did a lot of teaching through stories. And most of us know, anyone who's been a teacher or raised children, know the power of stories, particularly when someone is learning. You know, why does Goodnight Moon get read 1,000 times, and that's the only book the kid wants before they go to sleep? Or Pat the Bunny, or I mean, think of some of these stories. There is comfort in stories, and we relate to them, and they teach us things. So Hasidism left us with these teachers and these stories and philosophies. So when we think of Lubavitch, which is a Hasidic movement, that began after the Baal Shem Tov in the kind of late 18th century. And it began in a place called Lubav, or Lubavitch. I mean, that's where it was from. The Bobovers came from there. They're all named after the town or village that they had their origin in. And their rebbes are different than rabbis in that they pass it down to their son. The next leader, the next rebbe becomes their son. And if there is no son, it could be a son-in-law. The last Rabbi Schneerson was a son-in-law. And in his case and in some others, there was no child or son-in-law left. And so no rebbe came after. In some cases, right now, among the certain Hasidim, there are two sons that are vying. They each claim to be the rebbe. So it's different almost entirely. It follows the notion of priesthood, of the Kohen, or the Levi, and not the concept of a rabbi. Rabbis do not traditionally pass down to their son or son-in-law, their synagogue. Akiva's kid didn't take over after him. Hillel's kid didn't take over. Some of their relatives did play certain roles, but that's Hasidism. Any questions, just as we're doing chapter 2 here? Because we're going to have a lot of stories. That's what this book is. Yes.
It seems like they were kind of like the radicals. They were the hippies of their age.
Yes, they were the hippies of their age. And, we often think that Reform Judaism and Reform was also radical, but in a different way, a more conservative radical. And that was only a few years later, because the first Reform that we know was the very end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th. This whole period was a radical period, not just among Jews. It was the development of Protestantism. It was, a whole world was shifting. It was the rise of nationalism. Eventually, not so much later, it was the isms, communism, socialism. That century between the mid-18th and mid-19th century changed the face of our world. And the world we assume today grew out of that. So Hasidism was part of it, but Zionism then also eventually came out of that nationalism. All of this kind of stuff was percolating in the 1700s, 1600s, and it all was sparked, I would argue, by the printing press in the 16th century. Once that began, slowly, it worked its way through eventually to kind of the dissemination of knowledge and thinking, and people began to think. Okay, somebody's got a phone. I don't know if it's in the room or there. It must be Norma. I think I hear it there. Okay, so let's get to the text. Craig, if you would, we're going to start chapter 2 and begin to read through a little bit of this. We're supposed to do 2 and 3 today, so I may be skipping around. All right, we need a reader to begin. And that's Radositz, or Radoshitz is the town.
I'll read.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. Rabbi Bear, start there? That where I should start?
It's right, just like our Rabbi Bear who left.
Okay. Rabbi Bear of Radoshitz once said to his teacher, the seer of Reuben, "Show me one general way to the service of God." The Tzaddik replied, "It is impossible to tell men what way they should take. For one way to serve God is through learning, another through prayer, another through fasting, and still another through eating. Everyone should carefully observe what way his heart draws him to, and then choose this way with all his strength."
All right. So let's take a minute to process that. So what does that mean to you? What is that saying to you? What is the seer of Lublin? Seer, by the way, was what he was called. He was a visionary. It was just they had labels for these people. So what is that saying to you? How does that speak to you?
Well, that everybody's so different and we can get to God in different ways. There is not one path to connect.
Right, in fact, he's
Clarified.
saying everybody gets to God in their own way.
Mhm.
It's not that you can, it's that's the only way, in effect, you can, is through your, that's why the title of this is The Particular Way. It's your particular way, and that is very different than what traditional Judaism says,
Mhm.
right? And that was part of what Hasidism is saying. If each person gets there, and look at one of the ways you get there, eating, right? We used to talk about gastronomic Jews and make fun of them. You know, get a bagel on a Sunday morning and you have brunch and you're a Jew. Well, in a sense, yeah, your Bubby's brisket is a way that you relate to your Judaism. And some people, it is their path. And for some people, it's music. And for some people, it's stories. And for others, it's study and prayer. And for some, it's all. But there is no one path. Comments?
What struck me was the last
Oh, I
part of,
recognize you.
oh, you didn't recognize me? You said someone. I thought you
No,
forgot my name.
I recognize you.
It's a good thing we're not in the same room. So the last part struck me more, that everyone should carefully observe what way his heart draws him to, that it's not what someone else tells you to do or what you think you should be doing, but it's an emotional, it's not just intellectual, it's emotional, and it's your own, you know, your own intuition about what is right for you.
Right, good. Right, it is, you're drawn by your emotions, by your heart. He didn't say by your mind, right? It's not an intellectual path to God. From their standpoint, it's emotional. It's you, it's your inner soul that's drawn. Other comments? I can't see everyone.
Patty and Michael.
Who has it?
Patty and Michael.
Patty, and then Michael.
Yeah, no, I think Joni just said what I was going to say, except for one little thing I might add in that line, everyone should carefully observe what way his heart draws him to, and then choose this way with all his strength. There seem to be two steps there. And to just add, Joni, to what you said so beautifully, that there's like, there's an instruction here as well, that you carefully observe. And that one really struck me, of what that might mean to carefully observe one's heart, and therefore find that path and that calling there.
Good.
Just an observation.
No, good. Michael?
Thank you. So everything that was just said, and I'm thinking about the last chapter a little bit, and you know, the Yecha and the Hineni response. It's a very personal approach to religion, right? So in the last chapter, we were saying, you know, we are each of us is Adam, right? Each of us is trying to find out where we are. We're being asked that question, and we're supposed to try to wrestle with that. And the Torah is speaking to each of us, and each of us is supposed to respond. This is part of this second chapter, it seems to me, with following our heart in our own, you know, and I'm just looking at the title of the chapter, The Particular Way. But it's interesting using the word the particular way, because it's, you know, there's this implication that there's only one way. And in fact, what this says to me is there is only one way, but that's for you, for each of us, right? I only have one particular way. I can't follow you. You know, I can't be, I'm not supposed to be Moses. I'm not supposed to be Rabbi Glickstein. I'm supposed to be me. And so it's a very personal approach to how we become Jews.
Right, no, it is. And in fact, Craig, if you'd scroll down just a little at the bottom of that page, Magid, I would like us to go there, because that in fact, we lost it, back
On the
up,
bottom.
Craig?
It's on the bottom.
Oh, it's on the bottom, Magi. Okay, so Bobby, you want to continue?
Sure.
Zlochov.
Sure, yes. In the first place, this
No,
story,
Bobby, if you would jump down to the Magi,
what?
bottom of the page, bottom of that paragraph at the bottom.
Okay. The Maggid of Zolochov was asked by a Hasid. We are told everyone in Israel is in duty bound to say, when will my work approach the works of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? How are we to understand this? How could we ever venture to think that we could do what our fathers did?
Right, if you go down to the next, okay, go on. The rabbi expounded.
The rabbi expounded, just as our fathers founded new ways of serving, each a new service according to his character, one the service of love, the other that of stern justice, the third that of beauty. So each one of us, in his own way, should devise something new in the light of teachings and of service, and do what has not yet been done.
Okay, what was added here? What was added to what we were already talking about? What kind of next step do we get in this teaching that we didn't?
Can I speak? Hi.
Laura, yeah.
Hi. I think it's important that we each have our own individual Judaism, and that in this we each add something. We each have our own additions that could possibly be there for other people, and that it's what helps to keep the religion vital through the generations.
Good.
And helps it to adapt.
Right. Cantor, you want to add?
I think what is added is our relationship with other people, that all of these avenues are how we can affect the world that we live in. So it's not just worshiping God now, it's worshiping God and serving other people as well.
Good.
So relationship, I think that relationship is what is added here.
Mm-hmm.
It is all of that. I think all of that is true, but I also want to look at that first line on the second page that you read. The rabbi expounded, just as our fathers founded new ways of serving. Right? What it's saying, I think, is each of us is to look for the new way.
Right.
That is, not only is our way unique and particular to us, it's new. In fact, I want to read the next paragraph, because this is a paragraph, this next paragraph, that when I've done baby namings, I'm not doing them now, but when I was doing them, and brisses, we had cards of selections of readings that I kind of accumulated over the years. And this is one of the readings that we read, exactly this next paragraph. And it's very specific about what it's saying. And if you think of it in terms of a baby's name and the birth of a child, and then think of it as yourself, it helps understand and clarify this whole process. Every person born into this world represents something new, something that has never existed before, something original and unique. It is the duty of every person in Israel to know and consider that he or she is unique in the world in his or her particular character, and that there has never been anyone like him or her in the world. For if there had been someone like him or her, there would have been no need for him or her to be in the world. Every single person is a new thing in the world and is called upon to fulfill his or her particularity in the world. That's a phenomenal idea. I mean, think of it. It's not just saying we can't be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's saying no one can be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because only they could be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And only I can be me. And only you can be you. And there's never been another me in the world. And there's never been another you in the world. And they're saying there never will be. You know, there's this fascinating thing going on with right now. There was an article in the New York Times recently about doubles, about people, right? Doppelgangers.
Yeah.
And one of the theories is that we have so many people that have been born into the world now that the DNA is starting to replicate spontaneously, not through genetics, but that there are people who are our genetic duplicate just by the fact that there are so many people. This is the notion that in reality, in souls, if you will, we can't talk about physicality, but in souls, that can never happen. The varieties are infinite, and we are unique. Now, that is a remarkable idea, I think, right? How do you think about that?
Well, it's not just that there could never be, but there should never be. I mean, it's sort of creating that as the ideal, that you can't be Abraham and you shouldn't be Abraham. No one should be Abraham, because otherwise, whatever you're supposed to be will go unsaid, will go unaccomplished, will go undone.
Yes.
Like a boy.
Yes, yeah, Dennis.
Nietzsche.
Yeah. I think that puts a,
Wait, 1 second, is that Laura? Hold 1 second. Dennis?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Nietzsche said that the big project for each of us is us. And I see a similarity to this, you know.
Right.
And I see it linked to sharing the job of creation too. This piece that you're identifying.
Right, well, and remember Nietzsche, again, historically, is following this period. This is all during this period that these philosophies are permeating, and they're also receiving philosophies from Asia, and they're receiving philosophies from the Middle East. They're starting to be aware, and it's percolating.
You think that there's some mixture?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone is influenced by everything that they hear, they read, they see, right? So they're all influenced by each other. Look, Reform Judaism today is a close reflection of a lot of aspects of Chabad. It wasn't when I became a rabbi. It wasn't at all. It was formal. It was keep your mouth closed, no children at services, robes, read together. It was a very kind of almost military approach. There were some aspects that were looser in different places. But today, you know, it's very much welcoming everyone, accepting everyone. It's, you know, no matter where you are, you're welcome here. This is a place for you. All of that comes out of our being influenced, sometimes actively and sometimes passively, by what's happening around us at Chabad in their, you know, attempt to get people to light Hanukkot or to light candles or their mitzvah mobile, and the notion that you don't have to become Orthodox to walk into their shul. Well, all of that began to influence the world and us, and we have kind of absorbed it. And there are many of my colleagues who would object to that characterization, but the truth is, you know, we are a creature of our world, and we can't cut ourselves off from that world. Other comments?
Mark Sternbaum.
Mark Sternbaum. Rob, Mark, unmoderated.
Hi. This lesson, this teaching about the individuality of our pursuit of God, that we can each do it in our own way, and that we must do it in our own way and find our own way, is hopeful because it leads to a living religion, if you will, a living pursuit of God, and in the many ways that it can be done. And is a response to the idea that Judaism does not change and has not changed. You were talking about that a little earlier, but the possibility of new ways of approaching the study of Judaism and the learning and the worship and even the food. Now, that's an area I'm interested in. Now we have a lot more Jewish food from other than Poland and Lithuania that everyone appreciates. Now, the Middle Eastern food, the Indian Jewish food, Sephardic food, our horizons are much broadened because of that. But the idea that we can approach it differently and absorb new strains, new ideas, gives hope for the flourishing of a Jewish practice, of a Jewish people that don't become ossified and die off except for a very small group.
Good, good. Yes, Laura.
Hi. I just an observation that if each person, as it says, there's never been anyone like him in the world, for if there had been someone like him, there would have been no need for him to be in the world. Is called upon to fulfill his particular. That puts a whole lot of pressure on that little baby and that person to figure out what it is that is their particularity and what it is that they need to contribute to the world. And I think that's a hard thing to figure out. I mean, it could be a lifetime search.
Yeah, I don't think there's a time limit on it. But you're right. Look, Judaism is not a simple religion. If we were a simple religion, we might compete in numbers with Christianity and Islam. Yeah, and I'm not saying that Christianity and Islam at certain levels is simple, but at a basic level, in theory, it's fairly simple. It doesn't demand a great deal of a practitioner. It demands faith at its core. Both of them are faith-based religions. Both of them say, one says you turn your life over to Christ and you confess your sins, and in the end, you will be saved. The other says, and that's what Islam means, is it means basically a submission. You submit to Allah. And yes, there are things you're supposed to do along the way, but it is basic at its core submission. Our tradition is not about submission and faith. It's about seeking and finding and questioning. And that is hard. If you look at the beginning of Christianity when it split off from Judaism, you can see that we were together for the first century of the Common Era. And into the second century, we began to split because those who were following, in effect, Paul, were saying all you have to do is have faith in your heart and you will find redemption. And the others who were moving into the rabbinic Judaism were saying, no, there are 613 mitzvot, and you've got all of these obligations, and you've got to find the answers and seek them, and you have to learn and study. And so what happened was we became 16 million, and they became 1 billion, 2 billion people. I mean, there is a difference, right?
Yeah, we're like the working religion.
Well, it isn't, it's sort of, if you take it seriously, Judaism, it's hard. I mean, it's not just, look, you got to make your own Seder, for God's sake. You think about it, yes, some synagogues do give Seders, but you're expected to have your own Shabbat at home. You're expected to do your own Seder. You're expected to tell the story. You don't do that. In church, you do it at church. In the mosque, you do it at the mosque. You can pray anywhere, but you're expected to do it in a certain way. In Judaism, yes, there are standards, but you are free to do it your way and to create it your way. Yes, the Hurwitzes, which one or both?
It was me. So in the first paragraph on the page, I also found the word serving God. So not only are we supposed to find God in our own way, but then we are to serve God. in our way, which to me means we have to do action. And is there a difference between finding God and serving God?
Oh, how do you serve God? Kathy?
How do you serve God? By my
How
act,
do you serve God, Kathy?
by how I act, I
Okay,
believe.
specifically in your life, in your home, in your,
Yes, in my daily actions, in my thinking, I think. Even in how I think and approach the world, I think I'm serving God by trying to be positive and not a cynic. And I serve God by appreciating beauty, and I serve God by lighting the candles, and I serve God in all sorts of ways, once I find my relationship with him,
in your particularity.
my particularity, yeah.
Yeah, right. And that is what it's saying to us, right? So, any other comments? Because I'm going to skip to the third chapter, because that's really the essence of the second chapter, yeah.
Well,
But it's all right, Norma.
I read that the secular Jews in Israel are expressing more of an interest in religion. Have you heard that?
Of course, the secular Jews in Israel are expressing, well, they're expressing more of an interest in Jewish tradition, not necessarily religion. They're not necessarily saying, now we believe in God. But they are saying, we're fascinated by the Talmud. We're fascinated by these texts. We're fascinated by the things the rabbis thought and said. And we want to know about that. We want to understand that tradition because it has so much wisdom. They're not necessarily saying we're going to start praying or we're going to start be believers or we're going to put tefillin on. So they're not saying they're being religious, but they are being more serious about being Jewish, about being Jewish and what it means to carry on a heritage and what that heritage can mean. And yes, there are these things in Israel called secular yeshivas, which to us makes no sense. How would you have a secular yeshiva? But the reality is they're all over Israel. People study the text in a secular way. You can go to university and get a PhD in the Talmud in a secular way. You can also go to a yeshiva or to a midrasha and you study there in a secular way you're talking about God because the text talks about God, but you're not believing in God necessarily. And you're not necessarily asked if you do, right? So yes, the fact it's a different class, but it's once you turn Judaism loose in a society where it's the majority, it affects everything, right? Just like if you turn Christianity loose and give it power in a society, it affects everything. It's why we fight so hard to separate church and state. Because some of us, Dennis certainly, remembers what it was like to have forced prayers in school and read the New Testament every day at school. And it wasn't Judaism they were teaching, because it was a Christian society teaching Christianity. And in Judaism, we fight because we know that we don't win in that case. We want separation. Well, in Israel, there isn't separation right now. And so it permeates everything. There will be a time, I believe, when they will separate too.
Michael Berman.
Yes, Michael Berman.
Thank you, Rabbi. I have a slightly different take that I want to just experiment with for a moment. I was thinking about the statement, when will my work approach the works of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And then, several lines down, we're each supposed to devise something new, something that has not yet been done, right? In our own particular way, we're trying to, every person is a new thing. At some level, and again, I'm thinking back to the last chapter, right? Each of us is Adam, being asked the question. And I'm wondering if, and again, I'm just this concept, maybe each of us is also Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? We're certainly, you think about Jacob, we're certainly a religion, and even in this Buber, that's asked to struggle. And in terms of Abraham, I think about when he was, he left his home, he left his parents, and he left his home, and he left his community, and he went out into the world. You know, and I was thinking about the comment earlier. It's a big burden on each of us to find that particular way and that new thing. But these are all examples of, right, of our ancestors, our founding fathers, if you will, and mothers, who did new things, right? They did their own particular thing, and at some level, we're supposed to do our particular thing. And in some respects, we, you know, again, we're supposed to look at what does it say? In light of the teachings and of service. Well, you know, so those are some of the teachings, right? Struggle, you know, the way Jacob struggled, and go out from your home the way Abraham did, and cross the wilderness, you know, the way Moses did. So I don't know, I'm just playing with that, but it feels like that's part of the teaching too.
Right, well, yeah, it sounds like Reformed Judaism, doesn't it? And Hasidism was, in some sense, this major break. And their teachings do resonate with us today, with modern Jews. That's why you'll hear us, we have been for years quoting Hasidic stories. That's why Larry Kushner, your rabbi, is considered a Hasidic Reform rabbi, because he lives in the story world of Hasidism, right? So it is something that speaks to the modern sensibility, this whole approach of the individual who is plugged into a greater whole. That's the problem we have a bit in American society, is there are many people that don't feel plugged into the greater whole. They feel individual, but not plugged in. And Judaism, part of what we try to get with in our teaching is that we don't, it's not that our kids, let's say we have kids that are anti-Zionist. That is painful, but it's not outside Judaism. They're still plugged in somewhere into Judaism, right? And that concept, that's why at the Knesset, there are communists that sit in the Knesset. There are anti-Zionists who sit in the Knesset. We couldn't even imagine that in Congress. It would make no sense for a communist to be elected to Congress. It's never happened, right? It would never happen that an anarchist would be elected to sit in Congress. But within the Jewish context, as long as you're plugged in to the whole and your fate is with the whole, you can be a part of it. You know, at the Seder, we talk about the 4 children. Well, one of them is called a Rasha, a wicked kid, but he's part of the Seder, right? She is part of the Seder, and if she's not there, Seder isn't complete, you know? So let's go to chapter 3 for a minute. It's a little bit different because it's the resolution. And I think I struggle a little more with this, particularly the last image. But first, let's go to page 21 if we could, Craig.
Sure, right.
Got it. Oh, you're there.
Yes.
You're right there. You're ahead of me, right?
I like Glickstein on one step ahead.
And I tell you, that's great. So let's go back to this Chassid of the Rabbi of Lublin. Who would like to read?
I will read.
Okay. Who is that?
Miriam.
Okay, Miriam, go ahead.
Okay, a Hasid of the Rabbi of Lublin once fasted from one Shabbat to the next. On Friday afternoon, he began to suffer such a cruel thirst that he thought he would die. He saw a well, went up to it, and prepared to drink. But instantly he realized that because of the one whose brief hour he has still to endure, he was about to destroy the work of the entire week. He did not drink and went away. Then he was touched by a feeling of pride for having passed this difficult test. When he became aware of it, he said to himself, "Better I go and drink than let my heart fall prey to pride." He went back to the well, but just as he was going to bend down to draw water, he noticed that his thirst had disappeared. When the Shabbat had begun, he entered his teacher's house. "Patchwork," the rabbi called to him. as he crossed the threshold.
All right, that's the end of the story. It's a strange story,
Mhm.
right? Patchwork is a critical statement, right? He's criticizing, the rabbi is criticizing him. So let's read what Buber says about this. That's the next paragraph. So Amy, if you would read this paragraph.
When in my youth I heard this tale for the first time, I was struck by the harsh manner in which the master treats his zealous disciple. The latter makes his utmost efforts to perform a difficult feat of asceticism. He feels tempted to break off and overcomes the temptation, but his only reward, after all his trouble, is an expression of disapproval from his teacher. It is true that the disciple's first inhibition was due to the power of the body over the soul, a power which had still to be broken, but the second sprung from a truly noble motive. Better to fail than, for the sake of succeeding, fall prey to pride. How can a man be scolded for such an inner struggle? Is this not asking too much of a man?
You can go on, please.
Long afterwards, but still as early as a quarter of a century ago, when I myself retold this tale from tradition, I understood that there was no question here of something being asked of a man. The Tzaddik of Lublin was no friend of asceticism, and the Chassid's fast was certainly not designed to please him, but to lift the Chassid's soul to a higher rung. The seer himself had admitted that fasting could serve this purpose in the initial stage of a person's development and also later at critical moments of his life. What the master, apparently after watching the progress of the venture with true understanding, says to the disciple means undoubtedly, this is not the proper manner to attain a higher rung. He warns the disciple of something that perforce hinders him from achieving his purpose. What this is becomes clear enough. The object of the reproof is the advance and subsequent retreat. It is the wavering, shilly-shallying character of the man's doing that makes it questionable. The opposite of patchwork is work all of a piece. Now, how does one achieve work all of a piece? Only with a united soul.
Okay. So what do you think about that? It's not as straightforward as the other chapter. Remember, we're talking about resolution here.
Michael has his hand up.
Michael.
Yeah, I first actually studied this over 20 years ago with Larry Kushner. And I always remember this teaching by the word, but the whole book by the word patchwork. And it has stuck with me for the whole time. And I struggle with it tremendously. The concept of following one's heart and soul and having a united soul, as it says, of one piece. I get that, but the concept that this Hasid wasn't elevating to a higher rung by overcoming his own pride strikes me as something, I mean, as human beings on a pathway and a journey, the concept that we want to get to a higher rung certainly is something that resonates with me, but that it would be a straight line, that we could have a united soul right from the start by preparing, as this suggests, and so on, and just be ready and do it with the united soul without some sort of progression back and forth, which they call patchwork, obviously a derogatory term. I have a hard time figuring out how that can mesh with the pragmatism of our real lives and the struggles that we have. So I've had a hard time with this for 20 years. I'm hoping you can help me.
Oh, well, I think you're gonna have another 20 on it. Other comments?
Well, it is aspirational.
It's aspirational.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Michael is right. It's just, there's no way, it's odd that the chapter is called resolution, because I don't see how we can actually achieve a true resolution if this is how we're defining resolution. I think all of us would engage in shilly-shally to some degree as we aspire to reach that higher ground. So I don't have a problem with it in the sense that, I agree that it isn't reflective of our real lives. But it gives us something to strive toward.
Yeah. Laura. Oh, Laura, you're on.
Sorry. To me, it's sort of saying guns are ready, full steam ahead, but that does not jive with my understanding of Judaism and the way we practice with questioning so many things so much, and it's not allowing for that kind of questioning, and I find it extremely confusing.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's kind of like, even though he says he overcame his pride, what is he looking for? A pat on the back? I mean, if so, maybe he didn't really overcome his pride. I mean, maybe the idea is that it could be a criticism, patchwork, it could be a great job, pat on the back. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. That's not the point.
Yeah.
No, I think the patchwork is not approaching it as a whole, all in, and I do have a problem with that because I don't think that's how this religion works.
Right.
I think there's a lot to question, and it's encouraged.
Yeah, Mark.
I agree with the discussion, and I'd want to say that it takes a long time to find your soul, to find your direction, let alone have it be a unified soul. The earlier chapters are about, learning who you are and how you can serve God, what's the right way to do it. And this Hasid, I'll take him to be a younger Hasid, is clearly still in the search. He doesn't even know what the right way to be an ascetic is, to go from Shabbat to Shabbat without having a drink of water. Well, he's trying something out to see if that works. And until you have tried a few things out, you don't even discover what's the right way for you to go, and then to try to perfect it, to try to serve God the best you can in whatever way you've chosen takes even longer. So I think it's an unreasonable comment. It may encourage him to work harder, but it's an unreasonable comment by the Rebbe.
Yep, and look, there's nothing that says that Rebbes are always right or that they're always brilliant. But the fact that Buber brings it here, I think at least says in this small book that he puts together that he takes it very seriously. And therefore we're trying to take it seriously. I would say first that the Chassid took on a very big challenge. I mean, he didn't just not eat for a week. He didn't drink for a week. Now, my understanding is that you can die in 7 days of no drinking. Not eating. For eating, you can go, as I understand it, up to a month. But with not drinking, he endangered his own life in that process. And that in and of itself is problematic, that he took on this kind of a challenge for himself. He didn't do 3 days and he didn't do 5 days. He did an entire week of not eating and not drinking, first of all. And in that process, he then had difficulty at the end achieving it and put himself in a position of both being tempted and then feeling that he would be prideful and coming back and deciding, oh, now I'm not thirsty. Part of it is, what is it that we expect of ourselves? And perhaps sometimes we expect too much. And I'm also thinking of the other side. How does one break a habit like smoking? Usually by going back and forth for a long period of time, or alcoholism or habits. How do you, if you properly exercise, you don't just go to a gym one day and try to lift heavy weights. You're going to damage yourself, right? The idea is that you start in increments and you build up. And part of the notion is so that as you test yourself, you see what your limits are and then you extend the limits. But you don't throw yourself totally into something before you have tested the waters. I think there's an aspect of that here as well, that this chassid took far too much and therefore moved into not unifying himself, but in fact questioning himself in the process.
Is the rabbi of Lublin a chassid also?
Yeah, they're all chassids.
So
everybody in this book are chassids.
But it seems to me that the rabbi in castigating the chassid was basically saying, no, that's not the way you do it. It's not the rule.
Right.
When we just learned that you have to try new things and find your own way, which seems contrary to that.
Well, again, I think trying new things, you don't jump out of an airplane until you've prepared for it, right? And that means that you've learned how to fall, you've gotten the chute properly done, maybe you've been taking training with somebody. I mean, you don't just leap unprepared into something. And he may just be saying to him, take it step by step. Don't just throw yourself in and try to do the whole thing all at once. There's an interesting thing, and I want to do this as the last because I struggle with this chapter. Look at the last page 25, Craig, it's the next one.
Page 25?
Yeah, it's the checkers thing. So it's 24 and 25, it's the bottom of 24. Yeah, right there. So here it's the eve of Hanukkah, one of the days of Hanukkah. Rabbi Nachum, the son of the Rabbi of Region, entered the house of study at the time when he was not expected and found his disciples playing checkers, as was the custom in those days. When they saw the tzaddik, they were embarrassed and stopped playing. But he gave them a kindly nod and said, do you know the rules of the game of checkers? And when they did not reply out of shyness, he himself gave the answer. Now these are the rules, we all know these rules. So let's go down a little, Craig, so I can see the top, everyone can see it.
You mean to 25?
Yeah, 25, right. The first is that one must not make two moves at once. Second is that one must only move forward and not backward. And the third is that when one has reached the last row, one can move wherever one likes. What's he saying to us? What is this? What is the resolution in the checkers metaphor? We all know checkers. We all know you can only move one move at a time. We all know that you can only go forward, can't go backward until you get queen or king, right? And then you can move any way you want. So what does that mean to us?
It's a lesson about life.
What's the lesson?
Well, that you should not go backwards. You should be progressing in your life. You should be moving forward, but you should do it step by step, not try to do too much. But when you have achieved some kind of wisdom or knowledge, then you are freer and you can go in different directions, but not until you have gotten to that place where you have actually moved forward in a significant way, slowly, step by step. Then once you've gathered wisdom and knowledge, you can move more freely in any direction you want to because you have reached a certain place.
Yeah, Patty?
Oh, I don't know. I can't follow up on what Mark said, but the word that came to mind while he was talking was integration. That there seems to be a kind of integration of steps or of processes or of development on this path that is required. So that you can't just like, I think when you were talking, Rabbi, I heard like there's an abstraction of, what the Greeks would have called a hubris of the fasting. And this is the abstraction, this is the goal, I'm going to do it. But then as you were speaking and as Mark and the others were speaking, I thought of how we normally integrate slowly things into our bodies, the examples you gave of I wasn't thinking quitting smoking as much as like when someone has a great fear that they might do like a progressive exposure, in order to get over that fear and attain that goal. And then it becomes a little bit more integrated into the body. So I'm not making any kind of coherent statement here, but I'm picking up on that idea of, and that reality really in my own personal life of, I can think very conceptually, and so I can put out a goal like, oh we're doing that, oh for sure, but truly the most present and soulful moments I've had in my life have been moments of small steps.
Right.
I'm pretty sure.
And I think, before I call on Michael, I was just in a session on this about Israel. There's strategy and there are tactics in the military, right? So the strategy is what are your goals? The tactics are how do you carry them out? And I think part of what this resolution section, as Buber has put it together, is saying this is about tactics. This is how you get to resolution, because your strategy is you're looking at your heart to see what your path is and seeking that path. But then you have to develop tactics for how you get to that place. And tactics means that there have to be a series of ways and steps to get you there. And that gets you ultimately to a place where you can resolve who you are with the way you're living your life. I mean, I think that may be one way to think of it. And the patchwork statement, Michael, is his way of saying, fool, you take it on too much, take it step by step. Take it slower, easier. Michael?
Thank you. I think that, I find that very helpful. I was thinking very specifically about the checkers metaphor. And, the goal, first of all, there are rules, right? So the first issue is, no, there are rules. There are boundaries. So like, for instance, the Hasid didn't know one of the boundaries is don't go without drinking water for 7 days, right? So know the rules, know the boundaries, know the goal, as you just, echoing your comment from a moment ago. And if being of one piece and a united soul is when you reach the last row in this particular metaphor of checkers, when then you're a united soul and you can go wherever you want because you're of one piece. But the only way to get there, the tactics, as you just described, is you can only move one step at a time. You can't do two things at once, right? So that's a pretty clear statement. And whatever this means, only move forward. We can each take that however we want, right? But it's clear, right? You can only do one thing at a time, and you should always be moving forward, not backward. But with that goal that you want to get to the last row, which is the unified soul. So, that's the aspirational, as someone said earlier. It's, helpful to think of that way.
But I will throw a little wrench into this. If you think of checkers, you can jump backwards. I mean, there is a wrinkle in this, because if you're jumping an opponent, and you can jump forward and then backwards to take an opponent, if that opponent's piece is clear, right? If there's a space for you to jump. You don't always have to jump forward. And I think it's interesting only because metaphors are never perfect.
Right.
But it also, in checkers, there's diagonal moves, right? I think it's an interesting way, at least, of kind of thinking about the process of how we move in our lives, and how we should have certain parameters. At least this is the approach that Hasidism seems to be teaching, and so it's for each of us to decide how we take this. So next week you move on to chapter 4, I believe, and 4 or 5, and you'll be with Rabbi Davis, and we'll continue our journey toward Rosh Hashanah 5783, God willing, in person. Oh, wait, Benjamin Marks has raised his hand, our 24-year-old young man with a beard. Benjamin?
So I think there's something really important in that paragraph after the checkers metaphor.
Okay, what you got?
Well, so it talks about how it's important to realize that the soul is not really united unless all bodily energies, all the limbs of the body are united. And it mentions particularly the importance of unification of the body and the spirit. And I've always struggled with the fact that Judaism really does not place much of an emphasis on the body, how we should orient ourselves. And now, since having left home and graduated from college and really kind of, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, moved away from my Judaism, I've explored a lot more of the other philosophies of, all throughout history and all over the world. And a lot of different philosophies place an emphasis on aligning the body. And I wonder why that was never emphasized to me in my religious experience growing up. And I've learned that can really help to get your soul aligning the body. And just thought I'd mention that.
And it's really a wonderful observation. And the reason, part of it, I would argue, is because we as a people were forbidden to be involved in physical activities for most of the last 2,000 years. We were not allowed to be farmers or soldiers. We were not, in most of Christian society and Islamic world, that was not where we were. And so we became kind of intellectuals. Hasidism was a move back toward physicality. And the beginning, and again, that's 18th century, the beginning of us rediscovering, and Zionism actually was the notion that the only way that we will come back as Jews is to work the land, is to physically immerse and build our bodies up along with our minds. And so that process has actually been happening, but it takes time and it's slow because it's been a long time that we were intellectual and we were not physical. And by the way, one of the things that we've been doing at Beth Shalom and in a lot of liberal synagogues is meditations now, and the whole issue of alignment of body and of physicality. That's coming back. And it's coming back because of the natural progression of what's happened in the last century and a half, 2 centuries. So, Ben, sorry you didn't get it here, but it's happening and you're a part of it. So, Shana Tova to everybody. Have a wonderful Elul and Shabbat Shalom this Shabbat.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Rabbi.
much, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom to
Thank
everyone.